farm in Oklahoma. And we are talking today about Isaiah's nonprofit, UrthKynd, and also this gardening cooperative that he's getting going around that. We're figuring out how to structure this whole thing. So we've been meeting over the last few months. He's been working on this idea for how long have you been working on this, Isaiah?
I'd say about the last eight or so months. But the vision and the planning and everything really started probably 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. But always working full time, you chip away at it, and then with thank you, mailman. And then with COVID and stuff, it's Come here. Sorry, dog. With COVID and stuff, it gave me the opportunity to really start focusing on it full time. Mm-hmm. So, come here.
Cool. So we're trying to get it fully formed as a business plan. And so we've been working through my Regenerative Enterprise Design workbook below me, which is just a bunch of questions that I then use to fill out a business model. And you can read all about his project down there underneath him with his bio and project description. But we're just going to dive in here real quick. Also, I want to say we are live streaming. This is live on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. So wherever you are, hello, welcome, and you are more than welcome to contribute to the conversation. So whether it's the chat box or the comment section on Facebook, if you send us a message, I will see it right here on my computer, and I will respond as soon as we get to a pause in the conversation. So if you have questions or ideas or comments, please just jump on in. I don't know how many people are watching right now, so you'll just have to let us know.
I'm really sorry. My puppy got out. Can I just put him right back real quick?
Okay. So I'll just catch all y'all up to where we're at while he does that. So we talked about his organization in general. We talked about the purpose and vision. Came up with purpose and vision statements, which are down under his project description. We've got, we talked about the value proposition, which is basically, the products that he's offering and who he's offering it to. And then the market and delivery, talking about, a little bit more about who he's involving in this and how he's going to serve them. And then we talked about some financial goals, and that's where we hit this point where we had been talking about the nonprofit in general, but then we decided that it was important to focus on doing something that was going to generate revenue right away, and also something that was going to produce enough product that you could actually sell it, that you could create a market for it. And so rather than focusing first on organizing people around an outdoor community garden, we decided to talk more about him growing some mushrooms and microgreens in his house, because that would be a year-round thing and could produce a significant amount of money with a very small amount of space, and he could kind of spearhead that himself. And so we talked through some numbers on that, and he has already made some investments. I've got some numbers here of kind of the money that he's spent getting a microgreens operation set up, so he can tell us a little bit about that here in a second. And then last time we started talking about the structure of the organization as far as who are the various people who will be involved and how they will be involved. And we talked about how he wants to make it a cooperative, and we talked about what a cooperative is and how that functions. So watch the last episode if you don't know, the last couple episodes if you don't know much about cooperatives. We discussed that. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about how to get people involved in this. And he had a really good question that he was asking me right before we got on, so I want to get to that. But first, how about a little check-in, and maybe Isaiah can tell us where he's at with getting this little microgreens operation started in his house.
Yes, so I had some issues in disassembling one of the more really crucial pieces. So the room basically is prepared, and the AC is there, the dehumidifier is there. Might actually need a humidifier, actually. But in terms of climate control, it's going good. In terms of, I got one cage, big rack set up, However, the others were kind of missing some pieces because they hadn't been used in a while and stuff. And so I've got to get those pieces probably from get them from Home Depot. But yeah, the seeds are basically here. I'm waiting on the trays. I kind of ran into some budgetary issues, but I need to get a good abundance of trays, and then so I'm thinking by the next time we speak, I'll actually have at least 1 to 2 racks producing. Yeah. And so that's for the microgreens. That's pretty much it. And and the worm bin. I have a worm bin going that's pretty sizable. It's a 4x8. And the worms are like producing like crazy, and there's tons of worms in there. So I'm like dividing those and creating miniature bins that can be used for composting and stuff. So I'm just trying to, anything that I can do that, can be done, right now, I'm trying to just do it.
Awesome. Cool. So yeah, kind of getting back to the organization. So yeah, we've been focusing on talking about the cooperative, which would be a group of people working on growing food. Coming up to our bullseye diagram here, they would be involved we got 4 different levels. So there would be the customers who would be paying a monthly fee, and they would get a regular supply of food. And we were going to talk about focusing on things like microgreens or mushrooms, like nutrient dense, really fresh foods, like not staples, not things that you store, but things that have to be eaten fresh. So it makes sense for somebody to be getting a little bit at like once a week versus getting a whole lot at once. So it'd be like a subscription kind of thing. And then you'd have workers who are working like in Isaiah's house or in whatever building he kind of grows into, that would be just working as employees, full-time or part-time, and producing these mushrooms or microgreens or whatever for those customers. And then once somebody kind of really knew what they were doing, if they wanted to expand the operation and do it on their own, then they could become a producer and just do it in their own space, and then bring the produce to the cooperative to sell through their market to those customers. And then there would be a board of directors that would be managing it, that would be elected. If this is a cooperative, then all of these people, consumers, workers, and producers, each one of those individuals would have 1 vote for the board. Although, we were talking about having these different classes also have different representatives. So they'd have slightly different voting power in that maybe they all get 1 vote for the president, but then they each get to vote for whichever representatives represent the class or classes that they're in. So those are the people that would be involved. And then you were asking me right before about, how to protect it, that you want to stay involved in some way. So can you explain that? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So basically is seeing it as something, ideally, if it does do well, that I would like to be, I'd be involved in for, a long time. I mean, I would like to see this as hopefully a full-time job that is active in many different states and even in other countries. I've reached out to some friends in Uganda and Zambia, for example, and like just all the different areas that I've always wanted to go to. So I'm looking at this as a long-term, hopefully, sort of, thing. And so I'm wondering how the leadership or the founder retains some sort of voting rights and things like that, so that it's more, so that it's a secure sort of thing. Because I've heard instances in nonprofits and in corporations, for example, when where not only CEOs but like founders are voted out by, I don't know. Typically, I think it's because they don't do a good job, I think.
Right.
But, yeah.
Right.
So because it's something just near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
that I've always wanted to do. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
curious.
that's interesting. It's interesting balance. So yeah, in a democratic organization like a cooperative, as far as I know, gosh, well, with the Oklahoma Food Co-op, I seem to remember at some point we made Bob Waldrop, the founder, the president, and he was kind of the de facto president. And I'm not sure exactly how we did it, but he was like permanently the president. I don't remember how we did that legally, but I think we did. I'll have to ask somebody if they remember, or maybe you could ask a lawyer when you talk to them. But yeah, that might be possible. I mean, you can decide in the bylaws how often the board members are elected. So you could just say board members are elected once every 10 years. If you wanted to, you could do that. So you could give yourself kind of a long-term position. Also in the management structure, you could give yourself kind of a long-term position, just with however you structure the management. But yeah, I mean, typically in like a corporation or whatnot, yeah, the people who own the stock would vote for who's on the board, and then the board would hire a CEO. So yeah, they could easily vote out board members. The board can easily fire the CEO. That's typical in any organization, so that if somebody's not doing a good job, then you can replace them. That's true. However, there are structures where that's not true. So in an LLC, if one person owns more than 50% of the shares, they're not getting unseated. They have 51% of the vote. So an LLC is the structure you really want if you want to have absolute power and not have that taken away in any way. And then there's also different caveats you can make with a corporation. I know that Natural Grocers that I work for, the founding family have super voting shares. So their shares count for a majority of the vote, even though they're publicly traded. They just count it's like siblings, and they each have votes. I don't know if it's that collectively all of their votes together are over 50% of the voting power or something like that, or if each one of them can assume that. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I do know that they've retained control, that the shareholders who just buy stock on the stock exchange cannot vote over them. So there's ways to do that. Yeah. Let's talk about governance structure, and then we might come up with an idea of how we could do that. Kind of ensure that you have some position. And just because if you lost like the president position doesn't mean you wouldn't be involved in the organization. It just means you wouldn't have that particular position.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, let's see. Yeah, so let's just talk about governance in general, because I think last time you said that you weren't familiar with sociocracy or holacracy. Is that right? Okay, yay. So I can just give my little spiel here, like I did about cooperatives, and then we'll know some stuff. So there's some different organizational structures out there. There's some that I'm really not fond of, and some that I really like, so I can give you my opinion. Typically, like people in this field, in this like sustainability, let's say the earth field, are pretty opposed to top-down hierarchy. Top-down hierarchy is where you have some managers. There's like a top manager, and they hire managers underneath them. And with each level of management, the managers can tell the people under them what to do, to any extent that they want. They can micromanage them. So a manager can say, I want you to do this job exactly this way. If you don't do it exactly the way that I tell you to, I'm going to tell you to do it differently. If you don't change how you're doing it, I'm going to fire you or get you fired, right? You're insubordination, straight up insubordination if you don't do things exactly the way your manager tells you to do them, right? And because of this chain of command, if the top manager, the CEO, says, hey, we're going to change anything in the organization, they can demand that something way down at the bottom of the chain is changed. And if people don't change it, they're fired, right? So that's your typical top-down hierarchy. And often what that results in is that if someone at the bottom of the chain wants to change something, they have to go through asking permission all the way up the chain, which can sometimes take a really long time if it's a big change. Like it's got to go to their manager, and then it's got to go to that person's manager, and that person's manager. It's got to go up the chain, and it's got to come back down again.
Mm-hmm. I've worked in companies like that, in corporate America, and it's like they'll take surveys maybe now and then, but real change, even if there's a significant amount of people, it's so hard to get to be heard.
Yeah. Sometimes even changing small things about your job can be that way. It's like almost impossible. Yeah. And even if you do have a really good idea and people generally agree with it, usually by the time you go through that entire process, the actual change that's made is only like halfway what you suggested. Right, because they all have different ideas about how it should be done. It ends up being this kind of weird compromise or mishmash. Yeah, you get like half of what you want if you're lucky. So that's hierarchy. So especially in the 1960s when like the whole revolution started, like people were like, well, let's just do away with hierarchy. Let's do consensus instead. So there's this big wave of people wanting to do things by consensus. Now, I've had some arguments with some people from that era about what consensus is. And what they'll say and what they say in the trainings is that consensus is basically saying, okay, we'll agree to do something. It's a yes unless you have a good enough reason to block something. So it's just that everyone just has to go, okay, it's good enough unless you have a reason to block. If one person blocks, it doesn't go forward. Right? So ideally, like that kind of makes sense. Like if people behave well, if people actually only block when they have a really good reason to. But unfortunately, what often happens is that people get really kind of overprivileged about this. They want to have a say in everything. And they tend to block too much, or they just push people around like, I don't like the way you're doing it. I don't agree with it. And consensus means we all need to agree. Like people they come up with this mentality in their head. And most people, I think, have this, that consensus means agreeing. We all have to agree. And that's never going to happen in reality. Everybody's not going to agree on a perfect solution to everything. Right? So you end up having like 6-hour-long meetings about, if you're going to put the toaster on that side of the kitchen or that side of the kitchen. Yeah, I've been in these conversations, because like you just can't agree. Should the toilet paper go this way on the roll or that way on the roll? Like you end up in really long conversations about really minute things because people just don't want to agree. And this idea of just blocking, it doesn't really make sense when the idea isn't like really firm, when the proposal isn't being held really well, when it's just like people can just say, I see this problem. It's everybody's problem. Everybody needs to solve it. Everybody throws in different ideas. We discuss it to death. What we end up with is this compromise that's a mishmash of a bunch of different people's ideas all stuck together. And what we end up doing is kind of just like pushing and pulling on that idea until we get tired of it and then just let it pass. But what ends up happening often is nobody really agrees with that solution. Nobody really wants to do that solution. No one's taking ownership of that solution. And therefore, it ends up getting half-assed done. Like nobody really takes responsibility for it. So it doesn't get done very well. The reporting
almost
back.
Need a position.
Exactly.
Sorry, you just gave me a really good idea, but I'm gonna let you finish. I'm sorry. I jump-started.
Yeah, I'm sure. Anyway, so I don't like consensus. I did it for years. I really tried to make it work, but that's what I found happened a lot. And we ended up just stagnating. And in fact, I always quote Diana Lee Christian, who wrote the book Creating a Life Together about intentional communities. And she was a big proponent of consensus for intentional communities back in the day. But she wrote a paper that I read that was Why Consensus is Bad for Communities. And
I'm taking notes. What was her name again?
Diana Leaf Christian.
Okay.
She straight wrote up an article after promoting consensus for decades. She straight up wrote an article, Why Consensus is Bad for Communities. And she suggested if you're in an intentional community with people who are blocking everything, and you can't get things to change, you can't change the governance structure because they'll block it, you either need to leave the community or wait till those people die. Like you're stuck, you know.
Wow.
Consensus gets you stuck. And there was a guy from the Zeg community, and I wish I could remember his name, but the Zeg community in Germany, which is known for creating the Zeg Forum. They have an intentional community that also has an event center, and they recently started using holacracy, at least for the business aspects of it. And they were using consensus before. And this guy said the reason he liked consensus is because he wanted a way to block the status quo. Right. So things they get stagnant.
Well,
and there's not a lot of ownership of like, this is my idea, so I'm going to take responsibility for it and make it happen, right? So anyway, I spent a long time, I mean, this is my passion. I spent a long time like looking for another alternative. And like I was convinced I was going to have to like create it myself. But then I found holacracy and like I cried. I was like, oh my God, that just saved me 10 years of my life because they figured it out. So
I think deep down it's what we're all seeking, you know? Yeah, I'm going to do more research on it because I've never heard that word, but it sounds like holistic and crossy, like you know, like holistic society.
Yeah, so it's HOLACRACY, and the idea is holons. So holons are self-contained systems. So like your heart is a holon within the holon of your body, right? And each cell is a holon within the organ. They all can, they
5 billion of them. Yeah.
They have their own system. They do their own things of their own accord. Like your brain isn't telling your heart to beat, right?
Yeah.
It does it by itself.
We don't think about that. I don't even think in school I was ever taught that, you know? Like there are 50 to 65 billion cells every second doing independent functions. They're autonomous, but they're also working collaboratively.
Exactly. So how can we make our organisms like, how can we make our organizations like living organisms in that way?
Right. So it's like social capitalism, kind of like that, like social entrepreneurship.
Well, I've heard it connected to those things. I mean, there's a lot of people saying that like what regenerative means is creating organizations and systems to be more like nature. Right. So yeah, this is a question. How do we do that? And holacracy, although I think holacracy, it was invented by computer programmers, and you know, honestly, it might be a little bit overcomplicated because they're computer programmers, you know, and they spend a lot of time in meetings. So to them, it made a lot of sense to just like bake it into their systems, which is like having meetings every single day. But, you know, in other systems like farming, I think you could maybe simplify or at least have a little bit fewer meetings or have them less often, because it's just a little bit cumbersome if you do it exactly the way that they say. Like, it's not perfect, but the principles behind it that they came up with, I think, are just spot on. And that is, they borrowed some principles. Brian, what's his last name? I just lost me. Brian, the founder of holacracy, he claims he didn't know about sociocracy when he created it, and he claims that the principles are different, but they're pretty similar. So there's double linking, which is that each holon, they call them circles. They elect a leader for the subcircle, kind of like the board elects a CEO or hires a CEO. Not necessarily elects, but they assign a lead link, they call it, to the circle within, and then the circle within elects a rep link, a representative, to represent their circle to the outer circle. So there's a link from the out in, and there's a link from the in out, and both of those people are a part of both circles. Does that make sense? So you have like this force of the higher order leadership having some control over the people within, and then the people within also having some say in what happens in larger organization.
And what I was, so okay, in my notes what I wrote down was so you gave me the thought that maybe within an organization, and even socially conscious corporations, I think there should maybe be a department or a person or a group or something who is in direct communication with leadership, maybe once a week or once however long. You know, if it's a small organization, obviously they're in contact maybe a lot more, or maybe a large organization. But you know, there should be an individual or an organization in place that hears what others are saying, and that has, like, I guess, an open door policy, kind of like a living tip, sort of a, you know, give us your tips and recommendations, you know, that jar that saw one company had it, very social conscious company, even back in the early 2000s, called DaVita. And they do, they're a kidney dialysis company, but they're really big, even back then, on company culture. And so, yeah, and I always really enjoy.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to create a more conscious or horizontal kind of culture and have more communication, for sure. But let me just finish explaining the principles of sociocracy and holacracy so you get it. Because, like, this double linking is just one piece, which would just facilitate communication both ways, and power dynamics both ways. Okay, the next one is consent. So to me, there's a big difference between consensus and consent, and it's kind of inherent in the word. Like, when people hear the word consensus, they think we have to agree. When people hear the word consent, it's a little bit more, okay, I consent to you doing what you want. And that's what it means. It means, like, I'm consenting to you making the decision for me, right? It's like assigning people power and consenting for them to make the decision. It's not me having a say over you making the decision. It's different. So in consent, it kind of works like consensus in that you can still block things, but there's very specific rules around what constitutes a legitimate block.
Wow.
And of course, there's always the human dynamic of making a judgment call on that. But there's a good checklist of, like, what constitutes a legitimate block. Okay. So if it doesn't, then it passes. Period.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So is there a structure? It's like we don't have to invent the wheel for this. Like, this has already been done.
Holacracy is a complete constitution with exact rules that are as complicated as our constitution and how the Senate and House function. Like, it's got full decision making rules.
So you can have a holacracy that still falls under the structure of a nonprofit or a B corporation, for example, or even a corporation.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's just a governance structure.
Right. You know, one thing I wanted to bring up also, and I'm very new to it, and so I'm because I've been studying and kind of learning now and then and subtly implementing biodynamics, like when I farmed in Oregon, and now even out here in LA, I've been implementing biodynamic principles and stuff and learning more about it. But I think, Rudolf Steiner and the concept of anthroposophy is pretty fascinating, and I'm very new to it because thanks to the Biodynamic Association, huge shout out. Want to give a huge shout out to them. Might even be great to have someone appear as a guest or something if you wanted to, because there's just some amazing teachers and stuff out there who could explain it a lot better than I can. But Rudolf Steiner was just this amazing between the 1860s to the 1920s, amazing philosopher, architect, social reformer, clairvoyant, philosophy of freedom, I think, was one of his philosophical works. But the anthroposophy was the it has roots in German idealist philosophy and theosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I'm still learning about it, but I wanted to read something really briefly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it says that it was founded in the early 20th century by Rudolf Steiner, and it postulates the existence of an objective, intellectually comprehensible spiritual world accessible to human experience. And the followers of anthroposophy aim to develop mental faculties of spiritual discovery through a mode of thought independent of sensory experience. And they aim to present their ideas in a manner verifiable by rational discourse, and specifically seek a precision and clarity in studying. So anyway, I like the philosophy of it and kind of how the societal, like what I'm learning about it, and how to interact with others, and how to hear and listen to others, and to earth, to nature mm-hmm. as well. So yeah, worth implementing into a corporate structure, I think.
Yeah, totally. I was just trying to look up which book it was that I read. I read one of his books about biodynamics. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting.
Yeah, it's really deep, and so it does take study. It's not like one of those books you can just pick up on, urban farming or something like that. Yeah. Like if you really truly want to understand it, it goes really deep. And as a beginner, I'm probably not the best person to explain it. Mm-hmm. But in learning and hearing what more experienced, knowledgeable people have to say about it and stuff in our weekly classes and calls and things, it's like, oh, it's mind blowing. It really is. It's beautiful stuff. So
yeah, totally. Okay, so yeah, principles are important. I think Rudolf Steiner had some great principles, and I think Holacracy has some great principles. There's just a couple more I want to mention. So with that consent, the way that they do roles, and we're about to list roles, so I want to be clear about this, is to define them very clearly. So in Holacracy, each role has a purpose statement, has a list of accountabilities, and has a list of domains. So those are the things they have power to make decisions over without anyone else's input. Okay? Not all roles have to have domains. If you're a checker and you're just checking people out at a red cash register, maybe you don't make decisions about very much. But, most roles have some decision-making power in them. So, you define all three of those things for roles. And then once someone is assigned a role, they, have that power to make decisions, and their manager or their lead link can't micromanage them. It's like if the lead link wants them to change something, they can make a suggestion. And if they don't like it, they can de-roll them. Now, de-rolling is different in Holacracy than it is in other companies. In other companies, if you get de-rolled, that means you're fired, right? You lose your job. In Holacracy, that is absolutely not true. People hold multiple roles. So you might hold 7 roles in your organization. If you get de-rolled from one, it's not a big deal. You just get a different role. So if you're not doing a very good job doing one particular thing, you can just do something else. And in that way, the organization can actually put people in positions that they're good at, and not have this Peter's principle, I think is what it's called, where people get hired and then they start climbing that ladder, the management ladder, and typically they keep getting promoted until they get promoted into a position that they're incompetent to fill, and then they stay there. Because they don't want to get fired, they don't want to get demoted, but they can't get promoted because they're incompetent. So they tend to stay They tend to stay exactly where they're barely competent. Maybe eventually after doing that job for a while, they become competent in that job. But, when you hit that point, it's like you're not going any higher and you don't want to go any lower. And so you end up in this spot where you're kind of doing a job that's just a little bit harder than you would like to be doing. And you're maybe not great at it, but you're just kind of stuck there. Whereas with Holacracy, since you can kind of piece together, you could and you can hold roles in multiple different circles. So you could be doing a role that's like kind of way in the intricacies of the organization. I'd like to call it the intricacies rather than the bottom, because it's not this top-down hierarchy. It's more like into the details of the hands-on intricacies of the organization. And then you can also hold a role in the general company circle, which is like the broadest circle that's making decisions for, how the entire company functions. So you could hold a role in each one of those. You could hold, 7 different roles in 7 different circles. I kind of suggest, as a tweak to holacracy, that we limit the number of roles that someone can hold to 7, because I think once you get past that number, it becomes too hard to like hold in your head how many things, all of the things that you're doing. And like, Robertson, that's his name, Brian Robertson. He's holding like 30 roles in the holacracy organization, and I think that's just too much.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, when you get to that point, it's overwhelming. I've been in that point at the Integral Center. We used this at the Integral Center where I worked previously, by the way. So I do have experience actually working in a holacratic organization.
What was the general feedback? I mean, I'd love to get to that point where I could devote that kind of time to, because if this organization, or any organization with socially conscious is, has that sort of thing where the leadership has 30 different roles, like that means they're really doing a great job.
Maybe.
They must be really impacting people and helping people.
I think if you have that many roles, you're doing a few of them well and a lot of them not very well. So I'd say have fewer roles.
Yeah, I don't know. Unless you're just a powerhouse, like powerful, one person, extremely, that takes a lot. Just juggling school right now and everything else I'm doing and the nonprofit cohort and everything. That's a lot.
And you have to consider that, your roles at home, your roles in nonprofits, your roles, with your family and friends, even these are all roles that you hold. And even a typical job in a company is several different roles. They just tend to smash them together into this random, kind of bunch of responsibilities. It doesn't even always make sense that these things are all in one job description, So if you could just tease it together a little bit and put those accountabilities, those responsibilities into little bubbles that make sense, these things really fit together. And these, because they're under the same purpose. And that's why you have a purpose statement, because all of the accountabilities should fit under that purpose. The purpose of this role is to provide great customer service. Okay, well then what are all the accountabilities you need to do in order to do that? What are the decisions you need to make in order to do that? Mm-hmm. So you just define these roles very well, which I think takes some skill, and then you assign them to people, and then once they're in that role, they can make decisions within that role, within the defined domain of that role. Now, it gets a little tricky when somebody wants to make a decision that's going to affect other people's roles. And so the principle that I love about holacracy, which sociocracy does not have, I think, much to its detriment, is the idea of owning proposals. Owning, or in holacracy, they actually call it owning attention. They call it attention when you notice that something that could change, right? Something could be better or something is wrong, right? Then you call it attention, and you bring that to your meeting, and you say, I am noticing this tension. I would like to make a proposal. And you can either make a proposal or you can be the holder of the process of getting input from other people and putting together a proposal in the meeting. But that person remains the owner of that proposal all the way through the process. So they're going to deliver the proposal. They're going to accept feedback on the proposal. They're going to, sit there and ask if they can do it, and everybody else would give them consent. And then if they get that consent, then they're responsible for enacting that proposal, making sure it gets done, and reporting back to the circle regularly on the progress. So if you're going to bring up a problem, you better be ready to do all of that.
Nice.
I think that's essential.
It gives people a pathway to take action, to be heard. That's cool.
Yeah. But it also gives people the responsibility to not just throw things out like, well, I think we should repaint the room because I don't like the color, and making everybody else responsible for figuring out whether we should do that or not. If you want to paint the room, you paint the room. That's your problem. You do it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's holacracy. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, whether you use holacracy or not, I think that it's a good way to define roles. So if we could list some of the initial roles that need to be filled in your organization, which could be all things that you are doing right now, but like let's separate out the parts of what you're doing into roles so that you'll know, okay, I really like doing this role, I want to keep this role, but that role I don't like doing, I would like to pass it on to somebody else. And it's ready to go. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Uh-huh. So, yeah, do you want to start throwing out some ideas for some roles?
For roles?
Yeah.
Oh, so advisory. I'm thinking in terms of groups because I'm thinking it's a lot for one person, and people are also busy, and we're bootstrapping, and we want people to donate.
Well, think about it as the way that this would work is you would first form a general company circle or whatever you want to call it, and each person would be holding one of these roles, but then each one of those roles could be expanded into a circle.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that person could become then the lead link of an entire team.
Yeah.
But if you're just looking at that top circle, who would be the people in that?
So I would say art, which could encompass like 5 different things that they could recruit for, based on their experience and their knowledge and their network, maybe. So we need a director sort of for that. We need a director for tech and digital, which I would kind of work directly with because it's a huge key component, and that would encompass, a few different roles as well. Probably, I was going to say planning, but like policy would probably be a good one. Someone who can help organize, people based on their skill sets within policy change and, somehow influencing our leaders and stuff like that.
Are you talking about like influencing governmental policy?
Governmental policy that supports local food systems. Yeah, because there are laws that are that are kind of, they're old laws that were made like long time ago, and they don't support sort of the existing system where, okay, if a neighborhood wants to get together and collectively get rid of lawns and grass and they want to do something more climate friendly, there are laws actually that prohibit that in some places. So, we want to make more sensible laws that support, the climate.
Okay, so I'm tempted to call it something like policy change advocate or something.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that we're talking about policy outside your organization, not policy within your organization.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't want bland names. I want names preferably that are meaningful, like director of kindness, and that would hold its own particular role. We'd probably need something like a coordinator. So someone who kind of keeps an eye open, keeps an eye out, is maybe social media savvy, that kind of looks for other organizations that we can collaborate with and coordinates that channel, because these are all sort of things that I've tried to take on bits and pieces and understand bits and pieces of it, and they just take up a lot of time. So if holistically there was a group that was all kind of, connected towards this one goal, and we're using our skill sets nationally, even internationally, with these different roles, I feel like that's a much better way to accomplish it. Also, something like our gardeners or our designers or our holistic earth workers, something like that, who understand the complexities and the nuances of the earth and soil and climate and slope, and so that when we have a project, we can look within who knows, a 5 to 30 mile radius, and we can bring that up on a screen and we can discuss like, what are the best routes to getting compost inputs? What are the best routes to distributing compost? What are the best routes to, all these components that make a whole, like, holistic, not just a community garden, but like something much bigger than that. Eventually those are the kind of projects that I want to have a team that can help facilitate things like that.
Yeah. But I mean, as far as like a role around that, are you talking about like somebody who would like Okay.
Basically help to seek out and lead that working group. And maybe there's numerous leaders as time goes on, but somebody basically who could say, yeah, I really believe in this cause. I have experience in this industry. I know how to translate the business or the organizational needs into technical speak and what job roles that entails. And that person can go out and help to recruit based on, inform their own team. Because, and this would be a job for somebody who wants to be in a leadership role in, for example, corporate America, because that person would be getting direct experience on what their dream and what their vision is. And so if we're supporting their dream and their vision and they're supporting ours, it just works out. That's a huge resume builder. And I'm just thinking in terms of like 5 years from now, if I have to jump back into tech, what do I need to learn and how can I attribute that to this organization, which is going to be the social media. It's going to be some copywriting, it's a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're talking about like a project coordinator.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. But I would call it something a little more fancier, like digital experience leader or a holistic, I don't know, something special that sounds really good. Maybe they create their own title, but I want to stay away from the corporate America feel because it just, I appreciate the experience, but I really detest it in so many ways.
Yeah, I get that. And we can kind of play with words later. I think we need to just figure out what they are and what they mean. So maybe having simpler names to begin with would be good, just so we're on the same page. But yeah.
These are all pillars. I think these are all pillars.
Yeah, I mean, I listed a collaboration coordinator, which seemed like it would be kind of like outreach, kind of their PR, outreach PR kind of stuff.
Fundraising, which could help deal with, which could also encompass, I don't know, grants, loans. It could encompass, I mean, there's so many different components. Like, ideally we have somebody who understands corporations and accounting behind how we structure this. And so we don't really have to, it's totally sustainable. It's regenerative. And how all these people get paid is a whole nother question.
Yeah.
I believe there's going to be enough food grown for all these people, but not everyone being an international sort of project or a national sort of project is going to be able to get their food. So, I mean, I would feel so indebted to anyone who wanted to get involved with something like this. And I don't know how you express that gratitude in a way that's tangible, And maybe within the scope of the 5-year plan, which is building out tiny homes and yurts and holistic farm experiences and immersions, and having this strategically all around the nation. Like, that's a really big dream. But if that happens, that's an experience. That's something that you can offer people access to, like farm dinners and things like that.
Yeah, that's the dream, and you're not the only person who has it. But yeah, what we need to do, and I mean we as in the Regenerative Revolution, as in all of us together, not just you, Isaiah, but we need to come up with a business model that actually works to do that. Like, no one has done that yet. I don't know. Maybe somebody's doing it, but we haven't seen it expand to a point where everybody's going, "Whoa, look at that over there."
Well, I'm a big fan. Let me tell you, I'm a big fan of Curtis Stone. I think that he's doing something along those lines. I think that there's another guy out of New York, I think it's called Neversink Farms. And off of, I think, a quarter acre, they're grossing like 100,000 or more, 200,000, something crazy like that a year. I've looked at some of their videos, but I haven't had a chance to really study them. But I know that they've been offering like scholarships, a certain number of scholarships every now and then on their website. So I would check that out, Never Stink Farms. But they have a lot of really good free material as well. So aspects of that, Zaytuna Farms by Jeff Lawton. I took his permaculture course like a long time ago. And Zaytuna Farm, that is amazing place. And they're doing something like it, but I think a lot of the people there are volunteers. But it's a huge mega farm, so the volunteer experience is immersive.
Yeah, there's some mega farms. I mean, I'm specifically thinking about what you're trying to do in creating a network that's not just one farm. I haven't seen that really take off as a replicable model. So yeah, like let's see if we can come up with a way to create something where we gotta make people money is what I think. I think it's all well and good to say, yeah, let's all get together and do some gardening, like expecting people to show up and volunteer. It's not very sustainable. It's not, and even if it is sustainable, it's sustainable. It's not regenerative. It's not enough to expand, replicate, go viral, that sort of thing. It's enough to barely sustain, basketball court size garden, barely. If you're not paying people, it's really hard to expand anything because you don't have any resources. So I think that the direction we're talking about going with like microgreens is a really good start because maybe there's lots of people who are doing like work trade or they're doing internship kind of stuff while they're learning, but I don't think people are willing to do that if you can't promise them a job.
Oh, okay. So here's my thoughts behind that. Initially, it could start as an internship or something where, after someone has been in that leadership organizational level role for some time, then we can discuss the paid, more of a paid opportunity.
Yeah, I think what people really fail to do when they try to do this kind of thing is provide that really clear structured ladder where you start here, you're a beginner, you don't know what you're doing, okay? We're going to give you the information you need to become, a beginner, to know what you're doing enough to be able to volunteer. Then once you're at that level, we're going to give you the training you need to then become like a full-time intern or whatever level that is. And then once you're at that point, then we're going to bring you in as a worker, and we actually have the money to pay you a decent wage to do this, as a part-time or full-time job. And then you can go out and do this on your own, and we're going to support you in that. Like actually providing a structure and incentives and resources to have people know that they're going somewhere. It's not just, I'm going to show up and volunteer and maybe take home a, handful of squash, but like you're going somewhere, you see a future in it. You see that you could actually be doing this full time in 5 years.
Right.
Just really, like that's what you want. That's what all of the people coming in are going to want. If you ignore that, they're not going to stick around.
Right. So it's supporting their vision while supporting the vision of the organization and everyone uplifting and contributing to that organizational build so that the organization can then support everyone else long term.
And everybody who's working needs to be producing enough abundance, i.e. profit, that can be reinvested to grow the whole system. If you don't make a profit, you can't grow, and it becomes stagnant.
It's like a biome. Like when you dig in a beautiful, enriched, usually typically a raised bed. You don't see too many in-ground beds like this, but a beautiful raised bed, and you just move the soil just a little bit, and there's just like worms and tons of bugs everywhere, and then there are millions and billions of whatever, I don't know how many number, it's a crazy amount of like microorganisms on a microscopic level doing their thing, and everything is contributing and moving. Even the ants are moving and doing their thing. So it's like, everyone has to produce, or the farm doesn't produce.
Yeah, and compensation needs to be fair. And honestly, for beginners, for work traders, for brand new people. I just did a work day, and I don't want to talk shit, but these are some college students, and I'm just like, oh my God, we're doomed. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, people don't know how to do shit. Like, you got to
Oh,
like really hold their hand, you know? And when you're working
right.
with people like that, it's way more work to
Sure.
like show them what to
Super.
do and hold their hand through it than to just do it yourself. So, yeah, of course, people at that level should be volunteers because they're not actually producing enough value to get paid, you know? But
Yeah.
if they learn, it doesn't take that long to learn
Hmm.
to that point where then you can do that job well and then actually be producing that value. And you know, it just, but then you got to provide that like structure for people to excel, you know, and build into to the point where they can like do it on their
Hmm. Hmm.
own.
Yeah. I had similar, you know, experiences with volunteers in the past, and thankfully, a lot of my woofers are really, really good. You
Mm-hmm.
know, but I remember one in particular. After like 1 week, he was just like, you know, I'm too tired. I've got to go into town. You know, I've got to go explore, and it kind of just become like a facilitation for, you know, like a conduit
Oh,
for exploration and just like tourism. And yeah, so when you do get somebody who's like really charged and they're like, I want to be here, I want to be here, you know, maybe even long term, you know, I want to be involved and I support this vision. Like that is, I think, really beautiful. And I've
mm-hmm.
actually gotten a couple of calls, actually emails from some volunteers actually looking for, you know, an opportunity to just, hey, I just need lodging, I can buy most of my own food, I just want to help, I love the vision, but I just don't have the space right now to accommodate,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the living situation. So, but yeah, it's good to know that the help is out there, and I want to figure out a way to like make that happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it needs to be fair for them too that they're actually getting the education that they're looking for in the food,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
ideally, you can, if there's a volunteer living there and they're working, you know, who knows, 5 to 8 hours a day. I don't know how long what the
Yeah,
agreement would be. You know, ideally, like you could feed them as well, and that's the thing with just bootstrapping this
yeah.
right now. Is can't, you know.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've also seen it be unfair to where like woofers are getting overworked and not getting, you know, enough.
yeah,
So
I've heard of it, I've seen that, and
yeah,
I don't like
yeah.
that at
And
all.
also like at the end, even if it was a pretty fair trade, like at the end of it, okay, now what? You know, I want to see systems where it's like, you know, I think Joel Salatin does this really well at his farm.
Oh
You know,
yeah, oh yeah.
he like trains people up and then, you know, gives them, okay, you want to do your own thing here. Here's a spot to do it on my farm.
Mhm.
Go ahead and I'll sell it through my market, you know, and he works with
Wow,
them.
I didn't know he did that. That's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, yeah. So he uses something like holacracy and then like it's I forgot what he calls it. It's something like that. But he, you know, he'll like have somebody as an intern, and then once they
Hmm.
go through the internship, you know, he gives them the opportunity to start their own business, and he gives them the space to start their own business, and they just pay him a percentage of whatever they make.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really awesome. Yeah, I love his books. I love his farm, his
Hmm.
video. He's very inspirational. He's another one of the yeah, up there with like Jeff Lawton. Like, you know, there's so many of them. There's so many of them on YouTube. Like, I've
Hmm.
got so many videos I still need to watch and take notes on. You know.
Hmm. 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 Yeah. I mean, the great thing is he has a market that he can sell that
Mm-hmm.
food through, and he has space. So he has these
Oh,
resources to
wow.
offer, and the knowledge that he's passing down.
Right.
You know, so you got to have
Huge.
something to give people, and
Right.
then
It
that a
almost
pathway.
has to be kind of established already,
Hmm.
or at least in production. You
Yeah.
know.
I think it
Um,
doesn't have to be much. I mean, if you were just successfully growing microgreens, you know, and you
sure.
could like pay one person to help you, you know, like that would be a start.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you know what? That's really the plan. That's really the plan. And I have a young man in mind in his 20s,
Hmm.
friend of the family. You know,
Yeah.
who our moms know each other and stuff. And he just had a kid, and he needs the work too. And I know work right now is hard for a lot of people to find. So I
Hmm.
think this would be something like that would be a great opportunity. I
Yeah.
think for
Yeah. And I want to do this here too. So I've got my community garden I'm working on, and one of the students, like college students, who came was, well, he isn't a student anymore. He said he dropped out like I did because he wants to do this kind of work. And I'm like, yes, yes, absolutely. Keep coming back, and I will totally take you under my wing. Let's do it. So I love that. I love that kind of energy. It's just they're inexperienced, so it just takes a lot of like, showing them what to do and helping them along the way. But anyway, okay, we're like out of time, and we got like all talking about stuff. It's awesome. But we got some roles listed: art director, tech director, policy change advocate, director of kindness, collaboration coordinator, and project coordinator, maybe project coordinators, having like a coordinator for each project in particular. And I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list, but we started making one. Maybe if you want to think about it a little bit more between now and the next time we meet, we can fill out this list a little bit more. If you even wanted to, think about some detail of what these people would do, what are their accountabilities, what can they make decisions about, and yeah, I mean, thinking eventually these could be the leaders of teams. But if you just started small and had one person doing it, what would they be responsible for?
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, thank you. We're gonna have to stop. But thanks for joining me, and thank you, audience, for joining us. We will be back sometime in the next week, a week from now, approximately, maybe at the same time, probably. But yeah, you can find out on my website at regenerativedynamics.com. It's linked somewhere. You can find it. It's around you. Look around. And if you want to join my Patreon, Isaiah, have you joined my Patreon yet?
Not yet, but
trying to get Isaiah to join. No, I want you and my other clients on there specifically because I want to use that platform to like plan the revolution, like in general, like, and then we can get other people involved in that conversation of how we're going to spread these ideas, find more people who are interested in them, bring more people into the conversation. So yeah, I mean, it's a group effort, not just me. This is just, me trying to help some people and start conversations. So let's all work together. Patreon's a place to find me. My website's a place to find me. And I hope you join us next time. All right. Bye. Bye, Isaiah.